5 things at least that are just important to freedom is really important, that we're clear about people's rights, and where those rights are ambiguous or confusing, then we need to do work around that. I mean, this raises very practical issues for people familiar with the mental capacity legislation. You know, our legislation is okay, but it can become very dangerous and complex and cumbersome if you interpret it in the wrong way. You know, people rushing off to have attorneys appointed over their lives in all sorts of areas, completely unnecessarily. People doing it for good reasons very often, but really not really very practically helpful. So our rights are important, but also how we interpret our rights are important. Supporting people to have a voice, self-advocacy in communities is critical, but self-advocacy at an individual level is critical, and how we enable people to have a voice is critical to their freedom, and how we listen to them. But the most important word in the English language is, any guesses? No. No. It's one of the first words a child learns, yes? And it's an exercise in freedom. When you're at the most vulnerable, what you learn is to find a way of saying no. Because at least that word begins to carve out for you some capacity to be yourself, to have things your way. It's a blunt word, it's a tough word, it's not sophisticated, but we grab onto it as soon as we can manage it. If we can't manage it with words, we manage it with our behaviour, with our sounds. I've never met anybody with a learning disability, a complex communication impairment, who doesn't have some kind of way of saying no. It might require love, attention and care from the people around that person to notice, but there's always a way of saying no. So you also not just need a voice, but you need people willing to listen. And to listen with, and what is the most important fundamental thing to communication, is love. People know the story of the butterfly and the diving bell. Had I think, a stroke. He ended up with this thing they called locked-in syndrome. Yes, so it was his personal assistant who noticed that he could move his eyelid, and he wrote a whole book using his eyelid. She read letters out to him, and he winked when the right letter came by. But I always think what's really interesting about the story is that it took that act of love, consideration and noticing to make that possible. Yeah? So again, these fundamental things like love become really important. Freedom sounds all formal and flag-wavy and, oh, I don't know, I'm a raving anarchist, but it won't be achieved without the kind of love that underpins it all. Information, of course, is really important because it helps us understand things. But I also think what's really important is decision making. In my experience, one of the biggest traps for people with learning difficulties with more complex disabilities is that nobody is prepared to set up a system by which decisions get made. In fact, people can sit round in committees talking about what might be in the best interests of Jack, yeah, and why everybody cares about Jack, but maybe nobody's the ideal representative for Jack. These kind of conversations go on a lot. But I want to go, Jack needs somebody who's just going to be it for him sometimes. When it comes to making decisions, big decisions, small decisions, sometimes you need somebody to go, right, what I reckon, Jack, is this right? Is that what we need to do is this? So having systems of competent decision making, to me, is one of the fundamental building blocks of freedom. We take it for granted when we have the ordinary skills of communication that we can get our way or we can get our voice over. When that's not possible, then we really need to pay attention to that. And to me, that isn't best achieved by complex, like going to the courts and getting an attorney appointed. That isn't going to sort out freedom in the day-to-day lives of people with learning difficulties. That's a last resort. This is what my friend Wendy says: everybody can be free. This is what I believe. Everybody can be free. There is not a capacity barrier to freedom. There's a creativity barrier to freedom. There's a love barrier to freedom, but there's not a capacity barrier to freedom. And creativity and love are things we can do something about. It's not always easy, but it's stuff we can do something about.